Welcome to Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery, a conversation held at the intersection of substance abuse, mental health, and everyday living. Your hosts, Mark Regala and Justin Wolf, bring both professional expertise and personal understanding to the table. So welcome to the conversation. Let's dive in.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back for our third episode of Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery. My name is Justin Wolf, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mark Regala. Hopefully, everybody that's joined and tuned in to our previous two episodes enjoyed learning about the host here in regards to Mark's story about kind of what he's had to overcome and what's brought him here, as well as hearing a little bit about my story as well in that process. And we have the honor of being joined by Maggie Burke today, who is the mother who supported her son in his battle with a dual diagnosis and co-occurring presentation, and is really a pillar of strength when it talks about really standing in the corner of the loved one that you know and that you live with to support them on their journey. And so, Maggie, thanks for joining us late here tonight. How are you doing this evening?
I am A-okay. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome. We're thrilled to have you. And Mark, how are you holding up tonight?
I'm doing wonderful, Justin. How about yourself?
Oh, better now that I'm talking to both of you. So, this is definitely the highlight of my evening at this time. Really having the opportunity to talk about such an important topic that doesn't get enough attention, and really shining the light on how to really stand and be present when our loved ones are caught up in their biggest battles that a lot of times we don't have the insight or the awareness of just how intense those fights are that they are going through and facing day in and day out. And just the amount of strength and inner fortitude that comes with that to show up and continue to move forward in this world. And so when it comes to thinking about who would be that person that could really speak on this, I personally couldn't think of anybody else who could really capture that, so well as you, Maggie. And so what I thought would be a great way for us to kind of start is just sharing a little bit about your journey in supporting your son and his struggles, challenges, and obstacles that he faced during his time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Cormac's journey was probably about 9 years. He was the poster child, really, for dual diagnosis, anxiety, depression. Fast forward down the pike, we learned of a trauma that had occurred, a very violent sexual assault that we were not aware of. He had challenges with ADHD and processing. When I first found weed on him, it was really telling when I look back, because I asked him what was going on, and he said, I don't want to feel what I'm feeling, which was really, just a billboard for self-medicating. I kind of went through the litany of questions. Did anything happen? Can you talk about it? And he was kind of closed off, but we were linked into services because of his ADHD. So, and I'm a nurse and have a behavioral health clinical background. I don't do that now, but so luckily we got him kind of right into services to kind of walk down, walk down that road. It was 9 years, many treatments, many programs. He fought courageously and battled day in and day out. When you're talking about a 14-year-old, we lost him at 22. And I always say this, and I catch myself, and at no point in time, and I think this is pivotal to our discussion, did we ever lose him and he ever lose us. We flanked this young man through this horrific journey, and supported him and put resources in front of him. But these are not battles easily won. And it's very difficult. There's nothing in the parent handbook that prepares you in any way, shape, or form to deal with, whether your child has mental health, addiction, a combination, a dual diagnosis. So it is a very big learning curve to, to walk through.
Definitely. And I think when you even just say, having that open and honest conversation, as a mother, hearing your son say, I just don't want to feel this way. I'm trying to really kind of manage internally what's going on by looking external for a substance to do that for me. How was that experience for you?
Frightening. As I say, I had enough clinical knowledge to know this is not good. And we're not that you ever want to see your kid experimenting, whatever, but we're talking about profound ADHD, already on medication, already showing anxiety. This was not, not good at all. So as we started, down this journey, and he was put in dual diagnosis, which was great, which was a great identification right off the bat. It was very, but I don't think you have a strong enough sense, and maybe that's, I wasn't in denial, but you really, things do get a lot worse before they get better, and no one has those candid conversations with you. I mean, everyone's walking through and helping you, and we had great resources, we had great support, but I also sought those out. At no point in time did I have my head in the sand, because I thought, with this kid, I knew, he was my kid. I knew his makeup, and just could kind of, I had no idea where this was going to go and what was going to, show itself. And, but it was, as I say, very scary for a parent.
Right. No, and I think you really highlight, and you kind of made this point a couple of times, like, hey, he's still my kid. This is still my son, and I still see him as such. And I know a lot of those behaviors and a lot of the symptoms of the disease can really emotionally trigger us, and we can emotionally react. And I think it's critical that you didn't lose sight of, like, this is my son, and he's hurting and he's in pain. What was really important for you on your end to kind of make sure that you were taking care of yourself, so you were able to kind of still extend that compassion to him when you saw him really struggling there?
I think, again, you have to do the work along with your kid, whether it's educating yourself. And, we just, we listen to people. We put ourselves, at the mercy of professionals, and we listen to them. And we help guide them. We did, everyone in the family during this 9-year journey got put into therapy. It was imperative that we could process, while we were going through this with Cormac, that we could process our own emotion, because really, it's, as I say, it's very difficult. It's very chaotic. It's very disruptive. And everyone kind of had to work their way down this journey. And what does addiction look like? What does manipulation look like? What does, all those things, where you can still, love. And it was very important, and I knew if I came out of the gate with a very judgmental tone, I was going to close that door, and there was no way I was going to allow that to happen, because I didn't know what was down the pike. And, I just, when he said, and whatever, he was able to at least expound on, certain things at that point in time. So that it was very important, to keep those lines of communication open. And, as like we all know, it's a disease filled with shame. So that cannot be the messaging. They always have to know that you may not agree with them, but that you can validate what they're feeling and keep, let them have a voice. They have to, because they have to walk this journey. This is their journey. I couldn't fix him. He has to fix himself. All we could do was put all the resources in front of him and walk beside him and support him, which was very difficult at times, as you well know, to do that because of what this disease brings. And it is a disease of the family, because everyone is affected, when this happens. And we used to kind of have this, I would say, strong argument where I'd say, this is my journey, this is my recovery. And I said, you don't understand. When you go down that rabbit hole, 4 other people go down that hole with you. I can't pull you out, but we go down there out of fear and love. And so I said, it affects your behavior, affects not only yourself, but it affects everyone else around you.
Hey, Maggie, it's Mark, and nice to meet you again. I know we spoke at that mental health forum in Schaumburg.
Yeah.
I enjoyed speaking with you then. So, you mentioned those resources available early on. Did you rely on family members like mothers and fathers that were already in similar situations where they had a child with a dual diagnosis, dealing with an addiction, as a resource to you as far as how to approach them and have certain conversations with them?
I did at certain points in our journey. People who were working with Cormac put us in front of those people. I remember being in a treatment center down in Arkansas, and actually my our therapist also put me in touch with someone. So I did. As I get lots of calls now, because you're just taken aback and you kind of don't know where to start. Luckily for our situation, I'm clinically based, so I knew how to navigate and get him in front of resources and navigate through a healthcare system, which is not, a lot of people don't. And I'm very persistent. Justin knows this. I'm a very strong advocate, and I will advocate. I advocated for him till the day is long. To get things in front of him for him to be able to, to participate in. But it did. It did help to talk to other people. And even parents spoke at different centers that treatment programs he was in, and that, that helped as well. I mean, it was frightening, but you have to hear that, you have to dial into what, the stakes are life or death. And that's what I kind of had to, I didn't have to convince myself of that. But, you just have to remind yourself of that every day.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that. So, you had a distinct advantage being the fact that you're in the medical field. And obviously, a lot of parents don't have that advantage. What advice would you give to somebody that does not necessarily have that advantage as far as going out and getting resources and so forth? Because I have a unique perspective. I talk about my dual diagnosis, but I actually have a daughter that was hospitalized and diagnosed with bipolar, and she's got a mental health diagnosis. And I know early on, I actually struggled with that because when I started educating myself about bipolar, I had this guilt inside of me. And I think honestly that actually affected me and affected in a roundabout way the path that I went on, almost like a parental guilt that I didn't identify these signs or didn't recognize these signs early on. So Justin asked, how did you, cope with all that? And I think that's important to understand too, because it can affect us too mentally, obviously.
Yeah, I think reaching out to community resources is similar to you. We were kind of I don't want to say in the system, but he was already being seen by a psychiatrist who was dosing him for his ADHD. So that was my first call, and I reached out, and then it led me into a system of day hospital, inpatient. Like we kind of got linked with services, met Justin. That kind of became Justin became his therapist for years and years. But so I was fortunate. I didn't have to enter it cold. But there's a ton of, if you look up, there's interventionists, there's certified drug counselors, Al-Anon meetings. I mean, just kind of Googling will give you at least a start. And this community is so phenomenal that anyone is willing to help, and that's why, it helps me to do this, to pay it forward, because so many people helped us on our journey, that I feel very strongly, that we should, return this in kind, while they're in their crisis phase, and even, Cormac's sponsors and people that, were in his recovery homes and all those things. I said, it's such a great community where they'll hold your feet to the fire, meaning Cormac's, for accountability, but any one of them would pick their phone up at any point, night or day, if he needed them. So I think it's just a wonderful embracing, community, and I think getting, I wasn't caught in the stigma. I was like, my kid is in crisis. My kid needs help. That I just kept, I didn't care what other people thought. I wasn't going to get myself wrapped up in that, that messaging. I had a great support system, and I leaned immediately into my family. This was not going to be a secret. This was not going to be some journey of shame. We were hurting. Our kid was hurting. And that was what we were going to move forward with. Because I just, what message would I send to Cormac if I was like, oh, okay, we're not going to tell anyone about this? I mean, his school had to know. It wasn't like I wasn't taking a billboard out, but people were on a need to know basis, and I made sure that they did. And he made sure that they did too, because it was very important for them to know where he was at emotionally for his safety, and also just for acceptance, through this journey. And we were very fortunate. People in kind gave him that support.
So, and I think you do a lovely job here of kind of even naming it. Like, hey, if I'm not saying it's okay to talk about this, what's that message that's being received on the other end? Because I've seen that happen so often and so frequently where it's like, hey, this is our secret. We're going to keep this in our house. Don't talk about this. And it almost kind of feeds the very thing that you don't want, right? Like the old saying, like you're as sick as your secrets. Whereas here, like this isn't something to be ashamed of. This is a disease. And just like any other disease, you're going to need your supports and your allies in place to kind of help you navigate this world and everything that comes with it. Because if not, then you're left to kind of face the very thing that's fueling this. And that can be a very overwhelming and disempowering place to be. And so I think since you're talking about like just that open communication with everybody, I know that communication in the house is also just as important. So what did you feel like was really helpful to help the family really stay aligned in supporting Cormac on his journey?
It was tough. I mean, I will tell you, it was because everyone was at a different place at a different time. And again, I kind of was kind of Captain Therapeutic. So I kind of manned the ship to get, resources for everyone. And sometimes they were angry and sometimes they were aloof and sometimes, but we needed a level of transparency. We needed to expect that of Cormac, and we needed of ourselves too, and accountability. So, kind of sitting his siblings down. And, it's very tough because, you cover for your siblings, they're 18 months apart. So, and I would never hold that against them. I'm sure they knew stuff that I probably don't even know to this day. And that's okay. And I just had this conversation with my daughter that I would never, because your first thing is to protect your sibling. But I said, there's a safety element here. Just let us know there are not no ill or negative consequences, but also that I took the responsibility that Cormac is responsible for himself, right? Because I didn't want that burden on them, that they had the responsibility of keeping their brother alive. He had to make choices. He had to, work his program. And even when, we had to tough love him out of the house twice, and and it was horrific. As we said, it was like putting a puppy on a highway, He was not in a good place, but we could not have that chaos in our house. So I think that was, again, working with therapists, doing our own therapy, having everybody else, and just, that open door policy of, with the kids, his siblings talking to us, as well as Cormac. And that we don't have all the answers. We're all stepping through this, in the mud with you. And there's no magic fix here. So this is a trial by error, and and saying, I was wrong, or I handled that wrong, or I shouldn't have responded that way. We're all human, and if we're going to keep Cormac, held by those types of, what do I want to say, expectations, then we have to walk the walk and talk the talk as well.
And I think that's a big thing there, where you're talking like just that transparent honesty, and really kind of saying, hey, we're figuring out what does and doesn't work with you at the same time as we're seeing it play out in real time here. And we got a good idea about what's not setting you up on your right path. And so having to make some of those really difficult calls where you're saying, hey, I'm looking out for your best interest, because in this moment you might not know what that is. Or you might be so entrenched in the disease that you're so fixated on the one thing that's just kind of like right here in front of your face that you can't really see the impact. Nor in that moment do you have the ability to really think about what is the impact that I'm doing. And I think you really highlighted a key thing that a lot of family members can sit there with, is just like that fear that kind of comes up, is that when I'm making that tough choice to really hold the line, to look out for them when they're really not in a position to look out for themselves and their own best interests, that sometimes that fear could be, well, I put them out there, this might be it. And so I know that can get thrown out because, hey, I can speak just historically, like knowing myself, how I was when I was younger. Like, I knew emotionally how to pull on my mom's heartstrings. I mean, and it's like, it's awful to say now, but it's like, I understand, like, I know how to say these things. And I imagine Cormac wasn't much different in terms of just throwing the emotional ammunition out there to try and pull you in. And so how were those times for you and your family? Because like you said, there's other siblings involved in this. Like, how?
Yeah, I mean, nothing short of horrific, I will tell you. I mean, and I could, because of my training, and I could deflect it. I would not absorb it. And so, but I think, to look at in the fear, would we put him out? And Kevin, I remember when walking down the street with the backpack, and I'm like, he could be dead by this evening. I mean, but that can't stop you from making those hard decisions. I remember someone coming up, picking his clothes up at our house, and he was, worked with Cormac, and I don't think he was a sponsor, but he said, hold the line, I mean, I'm sobbing. He's like, hold the line. Yeah. He's like, my mom did the same for me. And we had no other, I mean, we were out of ACEs here. Tough love was the last thing we had to give them. And looking at just relationships, and I think it's so, the trappings are, as a mom, you want to fix, or, where are you independent, codependency issues. And I just kind of took a step back and, I explained it to people, like, would you tolerate this from your friend, from your family, from your husband or your spouse or your partner? No, because this relationship becomes very toxic. It's very chaotic and it's very toxic. And so you have to really set those boundaries up and hold them. And then you just have to hold them by the grace of God. And then you got to go do all that personal work to just process what the line you just stood, and stuff to this day. And I know we did everything we could, and I know we did, made the best decisions for him. But I know in times he felt rejected, which haunts me, and he felt unloved, which haunts me, because he was surrounded with nothing but love, but what he wasn't in a place to receive that love at times, because in that active addiction, he just could not love himself. So he could, and so, but that was still hard, because I know I'm dealing with an 18-year-old, but he's regressed to a 14-year-old emotionally, because we have no clean brain. And, and every message I just said, we love you. We love you. We love you. And every beginning of, the tough conversation, at the end of conversation, we love you. And that always had to be our bookends, so that, hopefully it's those times it sunk in.
So it's interesting you just made that comment, because Justin and I just came out of a support group before we were recording this podcast, and there was an individual in the room, and they made the comment about wanting to be loved. Okay, remember this, Justin? And I said, I understand that you want to be loved. I said, but do you love the person in the mirror? Because it's going to start with you loving yourself first before you can receive love. Justin said a little more elegantly than me, but that's what we talked about. We literally just talked about that about an hour ago. And what you just said totally resonated with me.
There's really good ways to get away from yourself, right? And that's so often what our use is driven at. Like, that's why I drank. It's like, hey, I just want to get rid of this person that's looking back at me. Like, I don't like being me. I want to get away from the problem of being me. And this provided a nice exit for me to kind of take. And each time it just kind of reinforced the very thing. It's just like, who do you keep coming back to? The person you keep running from, right? And I think that's really, when we kind of talk about this journey, like that's something that I really want to kind of highlight, Mark. And I love the fact you kind of brought it back to that, is just there's so much resiliency that gets lost in these stories. I mean, you look at when we're kind of talking about this, right? Just some of these challenges, obstacles, hurdles, he overcame, persevered, and kind of like people gravitated towards him as a result of what he learned in this process. And so, Maggie, like I just would love to kind of hear your thoughts on just kind of what you saw in your son and just his ability to be resilient despite having so much thrown at him that, I mean, again, you just never really knew the full magnitude of the battles he was fighting.
Yeah. And and I say this to people a lot. There's so many plates he had to keep up in the air. And I kept telling him, like, there's so much strength in you and so much power in your story, and you're a survivor. I said, you survived a horrific assault that was not your fault. And I said, and I said, you're going to continue to claim back as you go through this journey, claim back parts of you that you felt were taken. But I think the resiliency, like, people have no idea what it's like to wake up and face a multitude of, of challenges, from anxiety, depression, PTSD, in whether it's hour by hour, day by day, moment by moment. And it's such a delicate dance, because when one gets out of sync, where it might be, the anxiety, or then he stops taking medication, or being complacent. Like I know, Mark, you talked in the first podcast about, complacency, things like that. I mean, he was a young kid battling, from the age of 14 to 22. And I said, I never knew someone who fell so many times. I mean, because the Burks did check every ugly box in this journey, but got back up. And he got back, and he never lost sight of us. He always felt, wanted to be part of the family. He fought to, whether it was at a distance, because at times it had to be. We had to put that distance between he and us and put him with people who could best help him. And, but he still, it wasn't like, it was like, oh, screw you. Like, I'm gone, I'm out of here. He always fought, and I think that's a testament, to his strength and to our bond as a family, even though, at times I felt like we were a reality show, because we were, but I mean, you can laugh. I mean, you have to laugh at sometimes, as Justin, and I have, of some of the Cormac tales. God love them. But I think it's people don't, as I say, don't have that appreciation. And they're like, oh, why don't they just stop? Or I don't want this. I'm like, oh my God, do you have any idea what it's like to walk in people's shoes for 5 minutes like this? The compassion, the empathy, and I think everyone thinks, oh, that's their problem, or that's you over there. And that's part of my messaging, that look at me, look at us, the Burks. I mean, we are the poster children for this crisis, because we have lost Cormac, and, to kind of bring it full circle, that it knows no boundaries, it knows no socioeconomic, it knows nothing. And it will take everything in its path if unchecked and untreated. But it's something that has to be managed daily, if not more frequently.
And as you're talking, I mean, you kind of highlighted this journey took over some of like those most critical years of a lot of people's life, like 14 to 22. And that support, could you talk about like what that support and how you were providing it kind of changed based on, supporting, an early, those early years of high school to the time that he's 22 years old? Like, what did that kind of look like in terms of the way that?
Yeah, it ebbed and flowed, because, I mean, obviously as he got older, he's 18, so we're, he's still in treatment. And part of the deal was, we have to be, you have to sign a release. We have to be involved. Now, I don't need to be sitting in there with you, but if you're living under a roof, I need, we need to be involved for your safety. We need to be, we always fought for family integration. And all of us fought tooth and nail for it. And even if we had to take a couple steps back, we were always in the background supporting, meds, supporting therapies. And and I tell people too, it's okay. And my kids, I said, you can be angry at him. It doesn't mean you don't love him. I said, you're talking about two siblings, and families become very much collateral damage in this journey. And it's not that you mean to, it's just the pitfalls of the disease, because everyone kind of gets swept up with it. But I assure people, I said, we always went back, keeping those lines of communication open, even when we were angry. But as he got to be 18, I said, we and we had to put him out twice. I said, you have to learn that there are expectations in life, and society is going to hold you to the same rules that we're holding you in this house. I mean, I continue to have to do my job as a parent. I don't care if you're 18. And I remember Ian, one of his therapists down in Arkansas, because I remember with the dual diagnosis and all he's been through in the trauma, and I'm like, oh my gosh, just kind of working our way through processing. He said, Maggie, just keep remembering there's no excuse for bad behavior. Which really, to this day, in my toughest moments, I repeated to myself, because I have to hold him accountable. Even when he can't hold himself accountable, someone has to, until he can. But again, it was, the relationship changed with as he got older, and he always, I think he always wanted, wanted to try again, which was good. We never had him like, I'm done, I'm done with this. I hate you all, whatever. I mean, there was a lot of projection and a lot of, back on his family when he was angry. And I would, and I'd sit everybody down. I'm like, this is what Cormac is projecting, what he's feeling inside. He wants you to wear it, and that's, I said, because right now he can't express, but we still, again, it had to be transparency. It had to be accountability. And I would say, I'd say, Cormac, I'm not going to be lied to. I'm not going to be manipulated. I'm not, and all those things we had to keep revisiting those as you have relapse after relapse, and then you're building trust. And then I said, every time you break that trust, I have to take more steps back, because it's self-preservation. It was self-preservation for our family, that we were 4 people, in a lifeboat, and we would throw him life preservers. But it was very important that he knew we had to take care of ourselves as well in this situation, because I said, this isn't going to take my house. It's not going to take my marriage. It's not going to take your siblings at this point. Like, we have to figure out a way to coexist, through this journey. And at times it was in treatment centers and away from us, because that's where it had to be.
And so, Mark, I know you, like, on your end, you've talked about some of the family challenges that you've encountered. And so I wonder if there's anything from Maggie's sharing that's kind of jumping out to you.
I'm looking at it from the addict's perspective, I mean, that's what I'm looking at. And yeah, I look at it from my parents' perspective, even my wife's perspective. She thought it was a choice. She didn't understand that it was a disease. Okay. And then ultimately she ended up filing for divorce. My mom, I think, had an understanding of it was a disease, but I don't think she understood the magnitude, the underlying issues, the dual diagnosis, what was driving the obsessive behavior. And there was a lot of shaming, and there was a lot of guilt in what we were doing. And it honestly drove me to use more, because of that. But again, going back to my podcast, there was a conversation that I had with her and my sister when I was hospitalized in intensive care. And for the first time I ever heard her say this, she admitted that it was a disease, and she admitted that I was sick. And she said that she was going to stand with me in my journey and just do what I need to do to get better. And I'm telling you, man, the words to hear that from my mom, and to hear that, from my sister, when everything that was important to me pretty much abandoned me already, like my wife, my kids, my employer, all that stuff. That at that particular time were words I needed to hear to go down to that psychiatric unit. And then once I went down to that psychiatric unit, I heard that gentleman speak. And then, like I said, you got the acceptance, now you got the hope and inspiration, and that just kind of catapulted me. It's almost like the stars lined up, as I said, during that interview when you interviewed me. But I think my mom and my sister had to be educated, and they allowed themselves to get educated. My wife, she just didn't. She just she was entrenched in her ways. There was just an ignorance there, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. Just because society has ignorance when it comes to a mental health, she just thinks it's a choice, and she didn't take the time to educate herself and do the research, and even really, to be honest with you, go to like family sessions, with me or anything like that. I think she was embarrassed, that I went down the path that I went on, quite frankly. So I respect the approach that you took, Maggie, and I respect the fact that you said a lot of it has to do with the delivery. And I also respect the fact that you made that comment about it being a family disease, because it truly is a family disease. Everybody in the family is affected, and I don't think a lot of people realize that when they're going into this initially, but they typically learn fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like it's the old saying, like, hey, we don't have relationships, we take hostages. And so like it's almost like the entire system is being held hostage by the individual caught up in the disease. And so as a system and as a family, Maggie, you and your husband and the children endured one of the worst possible outcomes there
Mm-hmm.
with your son, which impacted a great number of people, which you saw, I mean, the outpouring of love and affection for him, and how many people he genuinely impacted and left feeling cared for. When at those moments, it's sometimes hard to kind of feel like I'm worth caring about. He was able to kind of extend that to other people. And what have you found really helpful for your family during this time of like healing?
I think public advocacy, for me is very very important in my grief journey. I get back tenfold what I give, and I think just giving a face to these diseases, that and I'm active in his recovery house, active with his wrestling coach who does fundraisers and things, and just kind of bringing about, like, I've created the message of Mac, which is just messaging worthiness. You are worthy. And I remember telling Cormac, you are worthy of this battle. Like, do never think that you're not. Just keep moving forward. Just keep getting, back up again, which he did. But, nothing prepares you. I mean, I every day I had an elephant on my chest that, I mean, still to this day, I mean, the phone rings in the middle of the night and I am completely triggered, or if some, there's just things you just will never shake. And I think that, just doing therapy work, through certain things, that because it's just such a void, it's an indescribable loss. And, and I know, people, like Mark, you talked about, estrangement with family and things like that. And I assure that from me sitting in, in my shoes, we went through the worst end scenario, so, your family, wants you better. They want the best version of you. Whether that's translated or not, sometimes the messaging is mixed, and again, how delivery is and how people are, families of origin, how people are raised. There's a lot that factors into this. But I think surrounding, we had a phenomenal group of friends, both of us, and we leaned into them because, I mean, for Kevin and I to lean into each other, we're totally facing, we did, absolutely, but there's times where you have to go outward because you're suffering the same. And my family, I mean, I was on the phone and Kevin was on the phone with his family, and we just needed to surround ourselves with that. And we still do, as I say. And I think just, continuing to keep, because Cormac spoke a lot and you could hear pins drop when he spoke. And so I just, I stand on his courageous shoulders and of everybody else that's still battling, just to continue to give, due diligence to the struggles that people go through.
I mean, just like you, Mark, Cormac would go into the treatment setting and share his story, and these kids would just gravitate towards him. And you're talking about like high school kids with a dual diagnosis who, needless to say, it's not where they desire to spend 6-7 hours of their day. And yet, here he is coming into the room. They're goofing off at first, and then after like 10 seconds, they just are all zoned in and focused on what he had to say, and just leaving that feeling in that room of just, hey, this isn't a dead sentence. Like, there's something else out there that you can achieve. Like, you're worthy of more. And I think that was just, the image when I think of him. That's kind of what I recall of just being so showing up and being so much for everybody else. And really, he was the gift that other people needed. And if he could have given that to himself, I mean, there's that key, just kind of back to what you were bringing up earlier, Mark, the idea of like, do you really like that person? When you look in the mirror, who's looking back at you? And so I know we only got have a couple of more minutes before we got our time is up here. And so Mark and Maggie, any other thoughts or closing remarks that you'd like to share tonight about really supporting a loved one who's caught up in that battle with a dual diagnosis?
I think, again, just leaning into professional help, seeking that out, getting their guidance, and the trajectory changes a ton through their journey. And, what might have worked, last year doesn't necessarily work this year. Again, I think it's super important to do your own work during it, because you have to absorb a lot. And you have to stand in the trench, and it's not a pretty spot to stand in. So I think it's super important to. Oh, did it? Yeah. Mark's in here, his battery cut out. Any words of wisdom?
Justin, I want to get cut out. My battery cut out, so I don't know how they're going to edit this. No, I just wanted to say I never met
technology, my friend.
Okay, but he sounds like a remarkable young man.
Thank you.
And I know that he lives on with all the lives that he touched when he was doing that public speaking. I mean that sincerely.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Sorry, my battery cut out. Let's see them edit that.
Technology, my friend. Like, that is.
But no, and I think, continuing to the worth, the self-worth that the finding the worthiness and the purpose. Like, I know, Mark, you said that in your podcast about you wake up in the morning and those questions you ask yourself. Yeah. And it's very simple, but not, you know what I mean? But very difficult. But, just looking what do I need to do to take care of myself? What is my purpose? What is my worth? And, kind of it's just a vigilant, keeping, your mental health and your well-being in check every day. Yeah. Easier said than done, for sure. But, it's a great way to start your day.
No, and I love that, because when you bring that up, I think of like the old saying, like, oh, just love yourself, right? You just need to love yourself. Oh, it's that simple? I just got,
right.
Thank you for that answer. I got the answer now. Oh.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you can't gift it to anyone. God knows we all try, but it has to come from within. You have to dig deep, and and just realizing, I think, looking at realizing your own strength, and I think in little increments, like any of us, I mean, when you look at a big picture, it's harder, but when you're like, oh, I accomplished this, or I did this, or, and just kind of, and I always say too, and there's days where you can't self-affirm, you don't, but to be open to somebody else affirming you. I think when you, and I think that's great about the recovery community, is when you can't be there for yourself, they're there for you, on those days. And that's just priceless,
Is Mark still in there with you?
He is.
I'm here.
His battery's dead.
I know. Poor guy. Mark, anything else that you'd like to really add?
No, I mean, just the comment that I made earlier. I mean, he sounds like an amazing young man, and as I said, he lives on with all the lives that he touched during all those presentations, in the hospitals and things like that.
And I think, his story, while it's unique and he's mine, and it's not uncommon. I mean, people fight like this every day. Like, too many people have to battle through this. And I think that's the important thing. It's not like, oh, he's some unique. I mean, his story is unique, but it's not, unfortunately, sadly. So I think that's to the messaging that this is, people, it's so much more common than people want to acknowledge,
But what is unique, though, is the fact that he was so transparent and did those presentations and
Yes.
shared his story. And
Yes.
That's what makes him special.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, think about a high school kid bearing his soul and just being openly honest and transparent with a group of strangers that he's just hoping to kind of like touch someone's life in a positive way. Like, I couldn't imagine doing that at freaking high school. Like, I was too busy still trying to pretend to be somebody that I wasn't.
And he even did it in his own school too. He presented a story about his life and his journey. And his teacher emailed me after. She said, and he had to leave the room. He was so emotional afterwards. And she said, I will tell you, everyone was moved to tears in that room. She said, this kid, he wore it. I mean, good, bad, or otherwise, this kid wore, wore what he was, and was just like, this is me, and this is Cormac, and and very much had an affinity for those who were struggling. It's sometimes to the detriment of not helping himself. And I think that's a common theme too, where, as you guys mentioned before, it's what people that came to his wake, walking on the track, or he'd sit down with a person at lunch. How are you doing? How are you? Checking in with everybody else. But at times poor Cormac wasn't checking in with Cormac enough, but it was easier. It's easy, that's the less, the road of least resistance to help them than to sometimes dig deep into that pain,
Yeah. No, and I just want to thank you, Maggie, for taking the time to be here with Mark and myself tonight, to be so open and honest and like just willingly vulnerable to really talk about just what this journey was like for yourself and your family members, while also honoring the memory of Cormac, the person, not defined by a disease, not defined by a behavior. He was a well-rounded individual who possessed so many great strengths and talents and just charisma that when you ran into him and you interact, like, you just left you with that feeling. And I mean, losing somebody that you love to this battle, knowing that, hey, look at the amount of resiliency and strength it took to kind of pick himself up each and every time after he fell down. And the fact that you all stood in his corner throughout that journey just speaks to the amount of unconditional love and support that not everybody receives when they're kind of stuck fighting this battle. And so I just really appreciate you and sharing your family's story, and hope that the amount of energy and time that was poured into him, you're also continuing to give that to yourself. And really, I love the work that you're continuing to do honoring his memory with Mac's message, which is just incredible. And Maggie, as always, I continue to learn and gain so much just by spending these times having these chats. And so next time on our podcast, our next topic of conversation in 2 weeks is going to be losing a loved one to an overdose, and really talking about what that journey and that emotional trench that we sometimes fall into during that time. Of course, this is the worst possible outcome that anyone could ever imagine experiencing, and knowing that somebody that we cared about, that we expect to be there, is no longer there with us physically. And so we'll be kind of diving into that next episode here in Healing Mind. And again, we're just happy to have everybody joining us on these discussions. I mean, it's just an honor to kind of be able to share this story and this information and have people really speaking from real life experience about what this was like and how that experience was for them. And these podcasts are going to air on the 15th and the 30th of each month. So feel free to set a reminder, whether it's in your phone, subscribe, just anything to kind of continue to join us. And as always, we really appreciate the feedback and support in these podcasts because we really want to continue just to provide really relevant and personable information pertaining to those impacted by the disease of addiction and mental illness. And so, again, Mark and I are more than open, I should say. Mark is very open to comments and suggestions. Me, not so much. So feel free to go to namidupage.org/podcast to connect with us. And again, thank you for being here with us this evening, Maggie, Mark. On behalf of myself, we will catch you on our next episode. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery. If you're on the journey to find guidance and insights, subscribe now wherever you find your podcasts. Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery is an educational resource, not a substitute for medical or therapeutic advice. The opinions expressed by the hosts and their guests are not necessarily those of NAMI DuPage. Go to namidupage.org/podcast for links to past episodes, show notes, and to submit a question or topic ideas for a future episode. Until next time, be well.